He looked at her faded hoodie and assumed she was the help. He looked at her skin color and assumed she was lost. But when Carter Sterling threw Jordan Vance out of her own first-class seat, he didn't realize he wasn't just delaying a flight, he was ending his own career. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just made one phone call. 5 minutes later, the pilot killed the engines, the doors locked, and the FBI was rolling onto the tarmac. This is the story of how an arrogant billionaire stole the wrong woman's seat, and the brutal, instant karma that cost him his freedom. You won't believe what they found in his luggage. The humidity of a New York July clung to the windows of JFK International Airport, but inside the exclusive Stratum Airways lounge, the air was crisp, scented with white tea and money. Jordan Vance adjusted the strap of her vintage leather weekender bag. She didn't look like the other patrons. While the lounge was filled with men in bespoke Italian suits and women draped in logos, Gucci belts, Louis Vuitton carry-ons, the flash of red-bottomed Louboutins, Jordan wore a simple, oversized beige cashmere hoodie and black leggings. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore zero makeup. To the untrained eye, she looked like a tired college student, or perhaps a nanny traveling with a wealthy family. To the trained eye, however, the details screamed stealth wealth. The hoodie was Loro Piana, costing more than most people's cars. The leggings were high-performance techwear from a prototype line not yet released to the public. And on her wrist, mostly hidden by her sleeve, sat a Patek Philippe Nautilus with a plain face, a watch that collectors would kill to get on a wait list for. Jordan was exhausted. As the CEO and founder of Vance Logistics and Defense, a company that had quietly cornered the market on secure server transport for the Pentagon and major Silicon Valley firms, she had just spent 72 hours negotiating a merger in Tokyo. Now, she was heading to Zurich for the final signing. She just wanted to sleep. She had booked seat 1A, the suite, specifically for the privacy. "Ms. Vance," the gate agent whispered, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. "We are ready for you. As always, thank you for flying with Stratum. We know you have other options." Jordan smiled tiredly. "Thanks, David. My jet is undergoing maintenance in Teterboro. Besides, your commercial first class is better than my Gulfstream's catering." David chuckled. "I'll make sure the crew knows not to disturb you unless necessary." Jordan nodded and walked down the jet bridge. She bypassed the long line of passengers, shuffling toward economy and business, heading straight for the dedicated first-class entryway. She boarded the Boeing 737-300ER, turning left toward the exclusive cabin that housed only 8 suites. The cabin was dimly lit, bathed in soothing blue LED lights. It was silent, save for the soft clinking of glassware in the galley. Jordan kept her head down, clutching her boarding pass, her mind already drifting toward the 3 hours of sleep she hoped to get before the meal service. She walked to the front left of the cabin, Suite 1A. She stopped. The sliding privacy door to 1A was already open, and there was someone in it. A man, likely in his late 40s, was sprawled out across the leather seat. He had already kicked off his loafers, his socked feet resting on the ottoman. He was wearing a navy suit that looked expensive, but was slightly too tight across the shoulders, suggesting vanity over fit. He had slicked back blonde hair that was starting to thin, and he was loudly chewing on a handful of warm nuts while scrolling through an iPad. Jordan checked her boarding pass again. 1A. She took a breath. Confrontation was the last thing she wanted right now, but this was her seat. She stepped into the threshold of the suite. "Excuse me," Jordan said softly. The man didn't look up. He flicked his finger across the iPad screen, taking a sip of his champagne. "Excuse me," Jordan said, a little louder this time. "Sir?" The man, Carter Sterling, finally paused. He didn't turn his head fully, he just canted his eyes toward her, scanning her from her messy bun down to her sneakers. A smirk curled the corner of his lip. "Service entrance is the other way, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with a distinct, condescending drawl. "Economy boarding hasn't started yet. You're clogging up the aisle." Jordan blinked. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. "I'm not looking for economy. You're in my seat." Carter laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. He finally put the iPad down and turned to face her, looking at her as if she were a cockroach that had scuttled onto a wedding cake. "Your seat? Listen, honey, I think you're confused. This is first class, specifically the Stratum suites. Did you get a little lucky upgrade ticket? Did the computer make a mistake?" He gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane. "Go find a stewardess. Tell them you're lost. They'll help you find row 45 near the toilets." "I have my boarding pass right here," Jordan said, holding it out. "Seat 1A, Jordan Vance." Carter didn't even look at the paper. He picked up his champagne flute. "I don't care what your little piece of paper says. I'm Carter Sterling. I run Sterling and Associates. I fly this route twice a month. I always sit in 1A. When I boarded, 1A was open, so I sat in 1A. Possession is 9/10 of the law, isn't that right?" "That's not how aviation law works, Mr. Sterling," Jordan said, her voice hardening. "You are in the wrong seat. Please move, or I will have to call the flight attendant." Carter's eyes narrowed. The playful arrogance vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. He stood up, not fully, just enough to loom over her from the suite. "You listen to me?" he hissed. "I just closed a deal worth more than your entire bloodline will earn in 10 generations. I am tired. I am celebrating. And I am not moving my ass for some diversity hire who thinks she hit the lottery because the airline overbooked coach. Now get out of my face before I make a complaint and have you banned from this airline." Jordan stared at him. She felt the heat rising in her chest. Not embarrassment, but the cold, calculating fury that had made her a shark in the boardroom. She didn't shout. She didn't wave her hands. She simply stared at him, memorizing his face. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "The only thing I regret is that they let people like you board through the front door," Carter sneered, sitting back down and putting his headphones on. Jordan turned around. A flight attendant, a young woman named Tiffany, who looked terrified, was standing a few feet away, holding a tray of hot towels. She had clearly heard the tail end of the conversation. "Ma'am," Tiffany whispered, looking between Jordan and the man in the suite. Is there a problem?" "Yes," Jordan said. "That passenger is in my seat. I need him removed." Tiffany looked at the manifest on her tablet, then at Carter, then back at Jordan. She swallowed hard. "I see that you are assigned 1A, Miss Vance, but Mr. Sterling is a Global Services member. He's very particular." "I don't care if he's the Pope," Jordan said. "He is in the seat I paid for. The seat that my company paid $12,000 for. Move him." Tiffany looked like she wanted to cry. "I'll get the purser. Please just wait here a moment." Jordan stood in the aisle, the humiliation burning her skin as other first-class passengers began to board, squeezing past her, giving her curious and pitying looks. Carter Sterling sat in her seat, eyes closed, sipping her champagne, thinking he had won. He had no idea that the plane hadn't even left the gate, and his life was already over. The purser arrived 2 minutes later. Her name was Beatrice, a stern woman with immaculate red lipstick and a tight bun. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had been flying since the golden age of Pan Am. However, as she approached the scene, Jordan noticed a flicker of hesitation in her eyes when she saw Carter Sterling. "Miss Vance," Beatrice said, her voice hushed but professional. "I understand there is a seating discrepancy." "It's not a discrepancy, Beatrice," Jordan said, keeping her voice level. "Mr. Sterling is squatting in my seat. He refused to move and used derogatory language toward me." Beatrice sighed, a micro-expression of exhaustion crossing her face. She stepped toward Suite 1A and tapped on the privacy shell. "Mr. Sterling? Mr. Sterling, could I have a word?" Carter pulled one side of his noise-cancelling headphones away from his ear. "What is it, Beatrice? I told your girl I didn't want the nuts warmed. I wanted them room temperature." "It's not about the nuts, sir. It's about the seat assignment. The system shows this seat belongs to Miss Vance. You are assigned to seat 4F. Carter scoffed, slapping the armrest. 4F? That's next to the galley. It's noisy. I'm not sitting there. Look, Beatrice, we've known each other for years. I spend $500,000 a year with this airline. This," he gestured a hand dismissively at Jordan, "person is clearly an upgrade or a mistake. Just comp her some miles, give her a voucher for a dinner, and send her back to business. I'm not moving. I'm settled. My suit jacket is already hung up." "Sir, Miss Vance is a full-fare, first-class passenger," Beatrice corrected him, though her tone was gentle, placating. "She isn't an upgrade." Carter's eyes darkened. He looked at Jordan again, his gaze full of venom. "I don't believe you. Look at her. She looks like she just rolled out of a shelter. You're telling me she paid full fare? Who's paying? Her pimp?" The cabin went deadly silent. The passenger in 2A, an elderly man reading the Financial Times, lowered his paper. Jordan took a step forward. "Beatrice, if you do not remove this man immediately, I will be contacting the authorities to report harassment." Carter laughed, standing up abruptly. He towered over Beatrice. "Harassment? You think you can threaten me? Do you know who I am? I can buy and sell you 10 times over before breakfast." He turned to Beatrice, his face red. "If you make me move, I will personally call the CEO of Stratum Airways. I will have your pension stripped. I will have this flight grounded and everyone fired. Do you understand me? I am not moving for this affirmative action charity case." Beatrice flinched. She looked at Jordan, her face pale. She made a calculation, a cowardly one. She weighed the wrath of the loud, aggressive white billionaire against the quiet, hoodie-wearing black woman. "Miss Vance," Beatrice said, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, I cannot physically force him to move without causing a significant delay and a security incident. The flight is fully booked. However, I can offer you a seat in business class. We will refund the difference, and I will issue you a travel voucher for $5,000. Jordan felt the floor drop out from under her. It wasn't the seat anymore. It was the principle. The airline was capitulating to a bully because he was loud and rich. "You're bumping me?" Jordan asked, her voice icy. "You're bumping me, the ticket holder, to accommodate a man who stole my seat and just racially abused me." "I have to think about the safety and schedule of the flight, Ma'am," Beatrice stammered. "He is very agitated. Please, just take the business class seat. It's very comfortable." Carter smirked, settling back down into the leather. "Smart choice, Beatrice. Get the trash out of here so we can take off." Jordan looked at Carter. She looked at Beatrice. Then she looked at the other passengers who were averting their eyes, afraid to get involved. A strange calm washed over her. It was the calm she felt right before she dismantled a competitor in a hostile takeover. "Fine," Jordan said. Carter laughed triumphantly. "Finally. Bye-bye." "I will not take the business class seat," Jordan continued. "I will deplane. I cannot fly on an airline that allows this conduct. Beatrice looked relieved. "I am so sorry, Miss Vance. We will process your refund immediately." "You do that?" Jordan said. She turned around and walked back toward the boarding door. As she passed the cockpit, the door was slightly ajar. The pilot, Captain Miller, was reviewing the pre-flight checklist. Jordan stopped. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. She didn't call customer service. She didn't call a lawyer. She dialed a number that was saved in her contacts simply as Uncle Marcus. She waited 2 rings. "Jordan?" A deep, gravelly voice answered. "I thought you were wheels up to Zurich. Everything okay?" "No, Marcus," Jordan said, her voice loud enough for the gate agents to hear. "I'm at JFK, Stratum Airways Flight 909. A passenger named Carter Sterling stole my seat, racially abused me, and the crew refused to remove him. They tried to bump me to business. I'm walking off the plane." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A heavy, dangerous silence. "He did what?" Marcus asked. "He said I looked like a charity case and asked if my pimp paid for the ticket. The purser, Beatrice, allowed it." "Jordan," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, "stay at the gate. Do not leave the jet bridge." "Why?" "Because," Marcus said, and Jordan could hear the sound of typing in the background. "You're not the only one with leverage. Give me 30 seconds. Jordan hung up. She stood at the end of the jet bridge, just outside the plane door. Beatrice poked her head out. "Ms. Vance, you need to go back up the terminal ramp. You can't stand here," Beatrice said, annoyed now that the problem wasn't disappearing instantly. "I'm waiting for a pickup," Jordan said. "Here? This is a secure area. No one can pick you up here." Jordan checked her watch. "I think you're wrong about that." Inside the plane, Carter Sterling was toasting with a glass of Dom Perignon, laughing with the passenger across the aisle about how some people just need to learn their place. Suddenly, the cabin lights flickered. The air conditioning hum died down. Then, the captain's voice came over the intercom, but it didn't sound like the usual cheerful greeting. It sounded confused, urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. We have just received a priority order from ATC and the Port Authority. We are being held at the gate. Please remain seated. We are waiting for further instructions." Carter groaned loudly. "Unbelievable! She probably pulled the fire alarm on her way out. What a pathetic—" He cut himself off. Through the window of seat 1A, Carter saw something. 3 black SUVs with government plates were tearing across the tarmac, lights flashing. They weren't heading for the terminal. They were heading directly for the plane. Behind them was a Port Authority police cruiser, and behind that was a black sedan with a small flag on the hood. Jordan watched from the jet bridge door as the vehicles screeched to a halt right under the nose of the Boeing 737. Beatrice's radio on her hip crackled to life. It was the gate supervisor, his voice panic-stricken. "Beatrice, Beatrice, do not close the doors. We have a federal stop order on the flight." "What?" Beatrice yelled into her lapel mic. "Why? Who is it?" "It's the FAA and the SEC. And Jesus, Beatrice, I think the FBI is here. They're boarding the plane." Jordan Vance leaned against the wall of the jet bridge, crossed her arms over her Loro Piana hoodie, and waited. The atmosphere on the jet bridge shifted instantly from bureaucratic annoyance to high-stakes tension. The air grew heavy. The lead agent mounted the stairs of the jet bridge 2 at a time. He was a mountain of a man, wearing a charcoal suit tailored to conceal bulk, with a face carved from granite. He wore no visible badge, only a small silver lapel pin shaped like a shield. Behind him were 4 others, similarly dressed, their movements synchronized and efficient. Beatrice, the purser, shrank against the fuselage wall. "Excuse me, this is a sterile area. You cannot just barge in." The lead agent didn't even look at her. He held up a hand, palm open, silencing her mid-sentence. He stopped directly in front of Jordan, who hadn't moved from her spot against the wall. His demeanor changed instantly from aggressive approach to deferential respect. He gave a sharp, curt nod. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried authority. "Agent Sterling Albright, Federal Protective Service, Special Clandestine Division. We received the distress signal from Secretary Marcus. Are you injured, ma'am? Were you physically assaulted?" Beatrice gasped. Secretary Marcus? The realization hit her like a physical blow. Jordan hadn't called a relative. She had activated a high-level government protocol. "Physically, no, Agent Albright," Jordan said calmly, pulling her phone from her hoodie pocket. "Verbally and emotionally, yes. I was denied my ticketed space based on discriminatory profiling by a passenger, and the flight crew aided and abetted the harassment, attempting to coerce me into downgrading to accommodate the aggressor. I have chosen to terminate my travel on this vessel." Albright nodded slowly. His eyes were cold fire. "Understood. We will handle the extraction of the hostile element. Please, Ms. Vance, if you would accompany us back onto the aircraft just long enough to identify the subject positive." "Of course." Jordan turned and walked back onto the plane, flanked by 5 federal agents. The visual was striking. The woman in the hoodie who had just been dismissed as trash, now re-entering the cabin surrounded by a Praetorian guard of federal power. Inside the first-class cabin, the mood had shifted from smug relaxation to confusion. The sudden stop, the police lights flickering against the cabin walls, the hushed tones of the pilots. Everyone knew something was wrong. Carter Sterling, however, was still deep in his delusion. When he saw Jordan re-enter with the agents, he let out a groan that was practically a shout. "Oh, for God's sake!" Carter boomed, pulling off his headphones. "Did you seriously call the police because your feelings were hurt? This is ridiculous. Officer, get this woman off the plane so we can take off. I have a meeting in Zurich that is worth more than your annual budget." Agent Albright stepped past Jordan. He walked to seat 1A. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood there, looming over Carter, staring down at the billionaire with an expression of profound disgust. "Are you Carter William Sterling, born August 14th, 1976, in Greenwich, Connecticut, CEO of Sterling and Associates?" Albright asked. It wasn't a question. It was a verification of data points. Carter bristled, puffing out his chest. "Yes, that's me. And who the hell are you to come onto my flight and interrupt my—" "Mr. Sterling, by the authority vested in me by the Department of Homeland Security and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, this aircraft is now under federal lockdown. You are to remain seated with your hands visible." Carter laughed, but it sounded brittle now. A bead of sweat appeared at his hairline. "Homeland Security? FinCEN? What are you talking about? This is a seating dispute. She's a lying little—" Albright leaned in closer. His voice dropped to a whisper that only Carter and the surrounding seats could hear. It was terrifying. "Listen to me very carefully, you entitled prick. You didn't just steal a seat from a tourist. You obstructed the movements of a Tier 1 defense logistics contractor, carrying clearance-level assets critical to national security during an active operational window. When Ms. Vance made that call, she didn't call customer service. She flagged you as a hostile impediment to a federal operation. You tripwired a threat assessment protocol that just lit up Washington, D.C. like a Christmas tree." The color drained from Carter Sterling's face faster than champagne from a tipped glass. He looked past Albright at Jordan, who was standing quietly in the aisle, her expression unreadable. "Defense contractor," Carter whispered. "Her. But she looks like the person who owns the servers your pitiful little hedge fund uses to trade on," Albright snapped. "Now shut your mouth. We aren't just removing you from the plane. We're executing a federal warrant." The words, "federal warrant," hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the first-class cabin. Beatrice, the purser, was trembling near the cockpit door. She realized with dawning horror that she had backed the wrong horse, and the mistake wasn't just going to cost her a reprimand, it was going to end her career. She had violated federal aviation protocols by allowing a hostile passenger to dictate flight manifest seating against a protected person. Captain Miller emerged from the cockpit, looking pale. "Agent Albright, is it? My first officer is communicating with the tower. They've shut down this entire taxi lane. What is the meaning of this? We need to get in the air." "Captain, this aircraft is now a crime scene," Albright declared, his voice ringing through the silent cabin. "Nobody leaves. Nobody takes off. We have probable cause to believe that Mr. Sterling is utilizing this flight to facilitate an interstate felony, aggravated by his interference with Miss Vance." Carter finally found his voice, though it was high-pitched and shaky. "Felony? This is insane. I want my lawyer. Get me Alan Dershowitz. Get me somebody. You can't just storm in here because I was rude to some politically connected. Mr. Sterling, you have the right to remain silent," another agent said, stepping forward and pulling out a pair of heavy-duty zip-tie cuffs. "We strongly suggest you use it." While two agents secured Carter, who began shouting about lawsuits and his constitutional rights, Agent Albright turned his attention to Carter's belongings. "Where is his carry-on?" Albright asked Beatrice. Beatrice, pale and shaking, pointed to the overhead bin above seat 1A. An agent retrieved a sleek, black leather Toomey rollerboard and a matching briefcase. "Open it," Albright ordered. "You can't do that without a search warrant," Carter yelled, struggling against the zip ties that were now biting into his wrists behind his back. Albright held up a tablet. On the screen was a digital warrant, signed minutes ago by a federal judge. "We got this while we were driving across the tarmac. You'd be amazed how fast judges move when national security is implicated. The probable cause established by your aggression toward Ms. Vance allowed us to run an immediate, deep-dive background check. You triggered flags at the SEC and the FBI, Carter. Big, bright red ones." The agents placed the luggage on the ottoman of Suite 1A. The entire cabin watched, mesmerized and terrified. The elderly man in 2A had put down his Financial Times and was openly staring. They opened the briefcase first. It contained typical business items, a laptop, some files, noise-cancelling headphones. But the agents weren't looking for typical items. They were looking for what Carter Sterling was desperate to keep hidden in the privacy of a first-class suite. An agent pulled out the laptop. "Standard encryption. We'll crack this at the field office in an hour." They turned to the carry-on bag. It was tightly packed with expensive clothes. The agent started removing silk shirts and cashmere sweaters, tossing them onto the floor of the aisle with disdain. Carter winced with every piece of expensive fabric that hit the carpet. "Careful with those. That's Brioni," Carter whimpered. "Nobody cares, Carter," Albright muttered. The agent reached the bottom of the bag. He ran his hands along the lining. He paused. "Sir," the agent said, looking up at Albright. "False bottom. Felt lining doesn't match the stitching." Carter Sterling stopped breathing. Agent Albright produced a small, wicked-looking knife. He sliced open the lining of the expensive Toomey bag. Underneath the felt, nestled in custom-cut foam padding, were 5 metallic, encrypted hard drives, each about the size of a deck of cards. They were featureless, save for a small red warning symbol etched onto the casing. "Well, well," Albright said, picking one up delicately with a gloved hand. "What do we have here? These aren't your vacation photos, are they, Carter?" Carter was hyperventilating. "I'm holding those for a client, I don't know what's on them. Privacy privilege. Albright looked at Jordan, who was still watching calmly. Ms. Vance, your company specializes in secure data transport, correct? We do, Agent Albright, Jordan responded, her voice clear and cool. Do these look like commercial drives to you? Jordan stepped closer, peering into the suitcase without touching anything. No. Those casings are military-grade shielding against electromagnetic pulses. They are typically used for transporting highly sensitive intellectual property or state secrets that cannot be trusted to digital transmission. Albright turned back to Carter, a grim smile on his face. You weren't just being an arsehole about a seat, were you, Carter? You needed Suite 1A because it has the highest walls. You needed privacy because if anyone saw you fussing with these during the flight, they might ask questions. You just came back from Tokyo, didn't you? A sudden, unexpected merger? Carter said nothing. He was staring at the floor, defeated. We already have the preliminary reports from our colleagues in Japan, Albright continued, his voice like a hammer. Massive data breach at a major Japanese tech firm yesterday. Gigabytes of next-gen semiconductor design stolen. And here you are, sprinting to Zurich, the banking capital of the world, with shielded drives in a false-bottomed bag. Albright stood up straight, addressing the entire cabin. This man isn't a businessman. He's a corporate mule. He was smuggling stolen industrial espionage assets. And he was so arrogant, so blinded by his own bigotry, that he picked a fight with the one woman on this planet equipped to spot him and take him down. The realization of what was happening rippled through the plane. The man wasn't just a jerk, he was a criminal. A high-stakes, white-collar criminal whose hubris had just blown up in his face spectacularly. "Get him up," Albright ordered. Two agents hauled Carter out of Seat 1A, without his shoes on, in his wrinkled suit, with his hands zip-tied behind his back and his expensive luggage gutted on the floor. Carter Sterling looked small. He looked pathetic. "My shoes," Carter mumbled, gazing longingly at his loafers, still tucked under the ottoman. "You won't need those where you're going," the agent holding his left arm said. "Federal holding cells provide lovely orange slippers." They began the procession. It was a long walk from the nose of the Boeing 777 to the mid-cabin door where the jet bridge was connected. Jordan Vance stood by the galley wall near the exit, watching him approach. As Carter was dragged past her, he looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a mixture of hatred and terrifying clarity. He finally saw her. Not the hoodie, not the skin color. He saw her, the Titan he had mistaken for a servant. "You bitch," he whispered hoarsely. "You ruined everything." Jordan didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just looked at him with the detached clinical interest of a scientist examining a particularly nasty virus under a microscope. "You did this to yourself, Carter," Jordan said softly. "You assumed my worth based on your prejudice. That assumption just cost you your freedom." The agents pushed him forward. As they exited the first-class cabin and entered the small galley area separating it from business class, Beatrice the purser was pressed against the wall, sobbing silently into her hands. Agent Albright stopped in front of her. He looked at her name tag. "Beatrice," Albright said coldly, "you made a choice today. You chose to facilitate the abuse of a passenger because the abuser looked like money, and the victim didn't play the part you expected. You enabled a felon and compromised the security of this aircraft." Beatrice couldn't speak. She just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Stratum Airways Corporate is already on the line with my superiors," Albright said. "I suggest you start looking for a new career, one that doesn't require judgment calls." They dragged Carter through the door onto the jet bridge. But the drama wasn't over. word had spread to the rest of the plane. The economy passengers, angry about the delay and confused by the police lights, were craning their necks. As Carter was led off, someone near the front of the economy cabin recognized him. "Hey, that's that hedge fund guy, the one who fired 5,000 people last year to boost his stock price." A murmur went through the crowd. Phones were raised. Dozens of cameras were suddenly pointed at the jet bridge door. The agents didn't try to hide him. They walked Carter Sterling right past the open door of the economy section. A chorus of boos erupted. Someone shouted, "Enjoy prison, Richie Rich!" It was a visceral, public humiliation. The man who, 20 minutes ago, had mocked Jordan for looking like she belonged in the back of the plane, was now being jeered by the very people he despised while in federal custody. Once Carter was secured in one of the black SUVs below, Agent Albright returned to the jet bridge where Jordan was waiting. Captain Miller was there, looking sick to his stomach. "Ms. Vance," Captain Miller said, his voice shaking. "On behalf of Stratum Airways, I am profoundly sorry. The behavior of Mr. Sterling was abhorrent, and the failure of my crew to protect you is inexcusable. We will make this right." Jordan looked at the pilot. She knew it wasn't entirely his fault, but the system had failed until she forced it to work. "Captain, your airline has a culture problem," Jordan said. "You train your staff to serve wealth, not people. Until you fix that, apologies are just words." She turned to Agent Albright. "I assume I am needed for statements." "We can take your statement at the field office, Ms. Vance, but Secretary Marcus insisted that your schedule be minimized. We have a chopper waiting at the General Aviation Terminal. We'll fly you to Teterboro. Your private jet has been cleared for immediate departure to Zurich. We'll conduct the debriefing in the air." Jordan nodded. "Thank you, Agent." She walked off the jet bridge, leaving the chaos of Flight 909 behind her. She didn't look back at the grounded plane, the sobbing flight attendant, or the stunned passengers. She had a merger to finish. While Jordan Vance's Gulfstream G650 climbed silently through the cloud layer, leaving the East Coast behind, the world below was erupting into a digital and financial firestorm. It started, as most modern catastrophes do, on social media. The video footage captured by the economy passengers on Flight 909 didn't just leak. It exploded onto the internet with the force of a supernova. Within 20 minutes of Carter Sterling being dragged off the jet bridge, the clip had migrated from TikTok to Twitter X, and finally to the breaking news desks of CNN and the BBC. The imagery was undeniable and devastatingly visceral. There was Carter Sterling, a man who had graced the cover of Forbes only a month prior as a visionary of the new economy, now stumbling in his socks. His bespoke suit was rumpled. His face was a mask of red-faced fury and humiliation, and his hands were bound tight with heavy-duty law enforcement zip ties. But it was the audio that sealed his fate. The smartphone microphone had perfectly picked up his final, venomous hiss at Jordan. "You bitch! You ruined everything." The internet is a cruel judge, and the verdict was instantaneous. The hashtag #WarSeatStealer began trending globally within the hour, followed closely by "Duck Sterling Down." Memes of his shoeless walk of shame were being generated faster than his PR team could issue takedown notices. But the social media mockery was nothing compared to the legal hammer that was about to drop. At 4:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the FBI held an emergency press conference at their New York field office. The briefing room was packed to capacity. Every major network had cut into their regular programming to broadcast it live. Assistant Director James Galligan, a stern-faced man who rarely spoke to the press, stepped up to the podium. He didn't mince words. Today, at JFK International Airport, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, in conjunction with the Department of Homeland Security, "Arrested Carter William Sterling," Galligan announced, his voice echoing in the silent room. "He has been charged with 2 counts of aggravated industrial espionage, 1 count of wire fraud, and 1 count of interstate transportation of stolen property." A flurry of camera shutters went off, sounding like automatic gunfire. "We can confirm," Galligan continued, looking directly into the cameras, "that Mr. Sterling was attempting to flee the United States with highly classified, proprietary semiconductor technology stolen from a partner firm in Tokyo less than 24 hours ago. The estimated value of this intellectual property exceeds $1.2 billion. This technology has dual-use applications in military guidance systems, making this not just a theft, but a matter of national security." A reporter from the Wall Street Journal shouted a question. "Director, is it true that the arrest was triggered by a seating dispute?" Galligan allowed himself a grim, almost ironic smile. "It appears so. Mr. Sterling drew attention to himself by engaging in a prolonged, abusive harassment campaign against a fellow passenger in the first-class cabin. He refused to sit in his assigned seat and attempted to intimidate a passenger who, unbeknownst to him, was a high-level government contractor with security clearance. His own bias and entitlement created the disturbance that allowed us to freeze the aircraft and execute the warrant. Had Mr. Sterling simply taken his assigned seat and remained quiet, he likely would have left the country successfully." The soundbite played on a loop on every news channel in America. Prejudice was his undoing. The financial fallout was cataclysmic. Carter's firm, Sterling and Associates, was a publicly traded hedge fund. As the FBI press conference aired, the markets were just closing, but the after-hours trading turned into a bloodbath. The stock didn't just dip, it cliff-dived. In the boardroom of Sterling and Associates in Midtown Manhattan, panic reigned. The remaining partners, watching their net worth evaporate in real time, convened an emergency meeting. It lasted less than 10 minutes. "He's toxic," the CFO screamed, slamming his hand on the table. "We are hemorrhaging capital. The Japanese are threatening to sue us into the Stone Age. We need to cut the head off the snake now." They voted unanimously. Carter Sterling was terminated as CEO, effective immediately. They invoked the gross morality clause in his contract, a legal loophole that allowed them to strip him of his severance package, his stock options, and his golden parachute. In a federal holding cell in Brooklyn, Carter Sterling was allowed his 1 phone call. He called his personal lawyer, a man who charged $500 an hour. "Get me out," Carter screamed into the receiver, ignoring the other inmates staring at him. "Get me bail." "Carter, shut up and listen." The lawyer's voice was cold. "The feds froze everything. Your personal accounts, the Cayman trusts, the Hamptons estate. Everything is under a DOJ lock, and the board just fired you. You're indigent, Carter. I can't represent you if you can't pay the retainer." "I have millions," Carter stammered. "You had millions," the lawyer corrected. "Now you have an indictment. Good luck with the public defender." The line went dead. Meanwhile, Stratum Airways was fighting for its own survival. The video had clearly shown Beatrice, the purser, siding with Carter and trying to bully Jordan into moving. The public outrage was nuclear. The airline's phone lines were jammed with customers cancelling reservations. High-value corporate clients were pulling their contracts. In the Stratum Airways headquarters in Dallas, the CEO was watching his career flash before his eyes. He issued a Code Red directive. First, they fired Beatrice. It wasn't a gentle letting go. She was met at the gate by airport security and stripped of her badge and uniform on the spot. She was blacklisted from the industry. The woman who had sneered at Jordan's hoodie was now unemployed and facing an internal investigation for violating federal aviation regulations regarding passenger safety. Second, the airline issued a groveling, 4-page apology. They pledged to donate $10 million to civil rights organizations. They announced mandatory, rigorous, bias and conflict de-escalation training for all 80,000 employees. Finally, they tried to reach out to Jordan Vance. High above the Atlantic, inside the quiet beige leather sanctuary of her Gulf Stream, Jordan was sipping chamomile tea. Her laptop was open, displaying the spreadsheets for the Aegis merger in Zurich. Her assistant, Leo, walked out of the cockpit area with a tablet. "Jordan," Leo said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Stratum Airways Corporate just emailed. The CEO personally sent it. They want to offer you Global Services lifetime status and 500,000 miles as a gesture of sincere regret." Jordan didn't even look up from her spreadsheet. "Tell them to donate the cash equivalent to the United Negro College Fund. And tell them if they ever contact me again, I'll have legal draft a cease and desist for harassment." "Not interested in the miles," Leo teased. "I value reliability, Leo," Jordan said calmly. "They proved today they don't have it." She finally looked at the tablet Leo was holding. It showed a screenshot of the news, a photo of Carter Sterling, looking broken and small, sandwiched between two burly federal agents. The headline read, "The billionaire who stole the wrong seat." Jordan studied the image. She didn't feel joy. She didn't feel triumph. She felt a cold, professional satisfaction, like a mathematician who had balanced a complex equation. "The media is trying to find your name," Leo warned. "They're calling you the mystery woman. Some are calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero," Jordan said, closing her laptop. "I'm a CEO who had a schedule to keep. Keep my name out of it, Leo. Scrub the manifest. I don't want interviews. I don't want a book deal. I want to land in Zurich, sleep for 6 hours, and close this acquisition." "Understood. We'll keep you as a ghost." Jordan leaned back in her seat, her own seat, on her own plane. She looked out the window at the dark expanse of the ocean. Down below, Carter Sterling was sitting on a metal bench in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and despair, realizing that his life was over. Up here, at 45,000 feet, the Silent Titan was just getting started. 3 days after the incident at JFK, the world felt like a very different place. But in Zurich, Switzerland, the air remained as it always was, crisp, cold, and smelling faintly of old money and pine. Jordan Vance stood in the penthouse boardroom of the Kronfeld Tower, a glass needle piercing the skyline above Lake Zurich. The room was soundproofed, the silence heavy and expensive. Around the massive, polished black walnut table sat 12 men, the board of directors for Aegis Systems, the Swiss encryption conglomerate Jordan had been courting for 6 months. The mood was tense. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the final kill. "Ms. Vance," began Heinrich Kappel, the chairman of the board. He was a man who had negotiated with prime ministers and oil sheikhs, yet he looked at the woman in the Navy bespoke power suit with a newfound, nervous respect. "The revised valuation you sent over this morning, it is 5% lower than our agreed term sheet from Tokyo." Jordan didn't sit. She walked slowly to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the sailboats drifting on the lake. She took a sip of mineral water, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the men uncomfortable. "The valuation changed, Heinrich," Jordan said, turning to face them. Her voice was calm, devoid of aggression, but heavy with finality. "Because the market context changed. My team ran a vulnerability audit on your new quantum shielding prototypes. They're brilliant, yes, but they require a supply chain of rare earth conductors that just became surprisingly volatile." Heinrich frowned. "Volatile? The market is stable." "Not the market," Jordan corrected. "The logistics, specifically the secure transport lanes out of East Asia. You might have heard about a massive data breach involving a Japanese tech firm 3 days ago, and the subsequent arrest of a certain CEO who was trying to smuggle that data into Europe. The room went deadly quiet. The Swiss directors exchanged glances. Of course they had heard. The entire financial world was talking about nothing else. The collapse of Sterling and Associates was the biggest implosion since Enron. Jordan tapped the mahogany table with a single, manicured fingernail. Carter Sterling was moving data that competes directly with your proprietary tech. The FBI seized it. That means that tech is now evidence. It's off the market. That creates a vacuum I can fill, but only if I acquire Aegis today, at the adjusted price, and integrate your encryption into my transport grid immediately. I am offering you a lifeline to dominate the sector before the dust settles. The 5% discount is the cost of my speed. Heinrich stared at her. He realized then that he wasn't looking at a standard CEO. He was looking at a grandmaster who played the board while everyone else was still reading the instructions. She had taken the attempted theft by Carter Sterling, an event that had personally victimized her, and weaponized it to close a billion-dollar deal in Switzerland 72 hours later. Heinrich uncapped his fountain pen. A Mont Blanc, naturally. "We accept," he said quietly. The signing took 20 minutes. Documents were stamped, digital keys were exchanged, and handshakes were made. The deal was done. Vance Logistics and Defense had just acquired Aegis Systems for $4.2 billion. Jordan Vance now controlled the most secure data transport network on the planet. As the lawyers began packing up their briefcases, Heinrich approached Jordan. He hesitated, breaking his usual stoic Swiss demeanor. "Ms. Vance," he said, lowering his voice. "If I may, I saw the video." Jordan arched an eyebrow. "I assumed you might have." "It was disturbing," Heinrich said, shaking his head. "But I must say, the discipline you showed, to stand there, to let him dig his own grave. Knowing you held the shovel the entire time, it was remarkable. The financial press in Zurich is calling you the Ice Queen. They mean it as a compliment." Jordan allowed herself a small, dry smile. "Anger is inefficient, Heinrich. Strategy is permanent." She excused herself and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the stunned directors behind. She walked down the marble corridor to her private holding suite. Her assistant, a sharp young man named Leo, was waiting with her coat and her secure phone. "The plane is fueled and ready at Zurich Airport, Jordan," Leo said. "We have a slot for Teterboro in 2 hours, but you have a priority message on the red line." Jordan took the phone. "Unlock." The screen flashed green. It was a secure text channel. The sender ID read, "Archangel." It was Marcus Thorne, Secretary of Defense. "Uncle Marcus." She pressed the call button. "Jordan," Marcus's voice came through, gravelly and warm. "Congratulations on the Aegis acquisition. The Pentagon is already drafting a memo to exclusively contract the new network." "Thanks, Marcus," Jordan said, walking over to the balcony to get some fresh air. "But I know you didn't call to talk about encryption protocols." "No," Marcus chuckled darkly. "I called to give you the update on your friend from Seat 1A. I thought you'd want the details before they hit the press tomorrow." Jordan looked out at the Alps in the distance. "Tell me." "It's a bloodbath, Jordan. A total wipeout. The judge denied the motion to suppress the evidence found in the luggage. Carter's lawyers tried to argue that the search was the fruit of the poisonous tree because the initial stop was based on a civil dispute over a seat. And the judge laughed at them," Marcus said with immense satisfaction. He ruled that Carter's verbal assault and refusal to comply with flight crew instructions created a reasonable suspicion of a security threat, justifying the federal intervention. The search stands. The hard drives are admissible. Jordan felt a knot of tension. She didn't know she was holding release in her chest. So he's done. He's cooked, Marcus confirmed. But it gets better. Because his assets were frozen immediately upon arrest, he couldn't make the $50 million cash bail on his own. He had to leverage his shares in his company. But when the board fired him yesterday for the morality clause violation, the stock tanked. The leverage evaporated. The bail bondsman revoked the bond this morning. Jordan paused. Wait, does that mean? It means he's not in his penthouse, Marcus said. He's currently being processed at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. General population, no suite, no champagne, and definitely no extra leg room. Jordan closed her eyes for a second, letting the image sink in. The man who had sneered at her hoodie, who had treated the first-class cabin as his personal kingdom, was now sitting in a concrete cell, likely wearing a jumpsuit that fit worse than the suit he had mocked her for. There's one more thing, Marcus added softly. His wife filed for divorce this morning. She's cooperating with the SEC. Turns out she knew where he hid the other accounts. She's trading his secrets for her immunity. He has no money, no family, no job, and he's looking at 20 years for industrial espionage and treason-adjacent charges. Treason-adjacent? The Japanese tech he stole? It has applications for missile guidance systems. He wasn't just selling to a rival company, Jordan. He was selling to a foreign state actor. He's lucky if he ever sees the sun again. Jordan sighed, a long exhale that carried away the last remnants of the anger she had felt on the jet bridge. He threw his life away for a seat, Marcus. If he had just sat in 4FF, he probably would have gotten away with it. That's the thing about people like Carter, Marcus said. They don't know how to sit in 4F. They think the world owes them 1A, and that entitlement is usually what gets them caught. You didn't just take his seat, kid. You took his rook, his queen, and his king. I just wanted to sleep, Jordan said honestly. Well, you can sleep on the way back. Gulfstream is clear for takeoff. I'll see you in DC next week. Bye, Marcus. Jordan ended the call. She handed the phone back to Leo. Good news? Leo asked. Justice, Jordan replied, which is better than good news. She picked up her vintage leather weekender bag, the same one Carter had looked at with such disdain. She checked her reflection in the mirror near the elevator. She adjusted her hoodie. It was comfortable. It was practical. And it was hers. She thought about the flight home. She had the same seat booked. Seat one way. But this time she knew no one would be sitting in it. She walked to the elevator, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. The doors slid open, and she stepped inside. As the elevator began its descent, carrying her from the high tower back down to the world she now effectively ran, Jordan Vance finally allowed herself a genuine smile. The silent titan had spoken, and the world had listened. Carter Sterling thought wealth was a shield that let him treat people like garbage. He found out the hard way that prejudice is a one-way ticket to self-destruction. He looked at Jordan Vance and saw less. The feds looked at his luggage and found 20 years to life. It's a brutal reminder. Arrogance is the most expensive luxury in the world, and karma has no baggage limit. What do you think? Did Carter get what he deserved, or should the airline have done more to stop it before the feds arrived? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of instant justice, smash that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reality check, and subscribe for more stories where the bad guys get exactly what's coming to them. Thanks for watching.